Earlier this year, there was a big conference. It was called Reinvent Law. And Richard Susskind, whom some of you may know, gave a lecture on artificial intelligence. And one of the remarkable things was he talked about change in the legal profession. And as we all know, the legal profession is not really the inventor of change. The legal profession is slow. And he reminded us that if law firms or legal industries are confronted with change, they normally react with the well-known 4 levels of acceptance, which were invented or created by Mr. Haldane, who was a famous biologist. And it seems to be when maybe not only law firms, but if people are confronted with imminent change, which have the potential to really significantly change what they are doing, the reactions are always the same. The first reaction is always, this is worthless nonsense. So if you tell them things are going to change, wake up, do something, start to act proactively, they would react like, this is worthless nonsense. Now the second stage of acceptance is very often a polite and slight condescending one to say, this is an interesting but perverse point of view. Then moving on, the third stage of acceptance is that people say, this is true but quite unimportant. And then in the end, the fourth level of acceptance is, I've always said so. And it seems to us that change in the legal market is going along the same levels, and that you can find law firms on different stages at the moment. Many people say, I know things are going to change, as I've always said so. Some other firms would say, well, this is true, but it's still quite unimportant. The legal industry is different. Now, I will not give you an answer today how things are going to change, but what I'm going to show you is that things are going to change. To what extent, we don't know yet. Now, let's talk about disruptive innovation. Disruptive and sustaining innovation, that was sort of invented by Hayden Christensen, professor in Harvard, and he developed that a disruptive innovation has the potential to create a new market or a new value network and eventually disrupts an existing market. So market leaders can be swept away by something which was looked at when it started in a rather condescending manner, like to say, that's interesting, but that's not interesting for us. On the other hand, sustaining innovation, that is something which is more common because it doesn't have this disruptive potential. It helps to change for the better. It's not threatening as disruptive innovation is. Now, we all would like to stick to the sustaining innovation, but if you look at these brands, you see that even big names and big industries just can fail if they don't recognize the signs of change. Look at Kodak, for example. Kodak was the absolute market leader in photography. And it may be cynical, they invented digital photography, but they didn't take it serious enough. And all of a sudden, digital photography boosted the market, and Kodak today is just history. Remember the BlackBerry. Some of you may still work with the BlackBerry. I would advise you to early enough change your devices, because there will come a time where BlackBerry is no longer on the market. But it was absolutely cool in 2005. It was highly innovative, but then came the iPhone and BlackBerry was history. And there are other firms, big names like Microsoft, which had their past innovation in the 80s. They still earn most of their money with a very old product, which is the Office application. What is the future of Microsoft? We don't know. What we know is Microsoft is struggling, still very profitable, but struggling. Look at Sony with their Walkman. They invented the way of listening to music while having a walk. Who has a Walkman now? Nokia, a great name, AOL, started that people went into the internet. Yahoo is struggling. So just to remind us, there are firms in the market and big names in the market who just were swept away by disruptive innovation. Now, does that play any role for the legal industry? Are there any legal BlackBerries outside which are going to be replaced by legal iPhones? I don't know. Some alternative service providers would claim that they are doing so. There is a firm called Axiom who is proud enough to say that they are very close to that, what we would call the legal iPhone. Rumors go that in a pitch a couple of days ago, they defeated Wachter Lipton, and I don't know whether that is just a story or whether that's true. But normally we would say the legal profession is different, and the legal profession will not be victim to any disruptive innovation. But Mr. Christensen wrote an article in last October, Harvard Business Review, Consulting on the Cusp of Disruption. And he described the changes in the consulting industry, not in the legal industry, but he wrote about changes in McKinsey and in Boston Consulting, and he described how their business is changing from advisory business to IT-based business, to advising on the base of big data. And the interesting thing in this article was that he said the consulting industry is going down the same route as the legal industry, which is victim of disruptive innovation. And he mentioned Freshfields as being the innovator in the legal market. We found that very interesting, so that we thought, let's look into it. Maybe there is some disruptive innovation going on in the legal market, and we haven't noticed it yet. Now, if you look at your bookshelf to find out where the market is standing, you tend to get some major depressions. Because if you read only the titles of these books, you don't think that things are going down well. It started with Richard Susskind with his book, The End of Lawyers, Rethinking the Nature of Legal Services. And if you talk to Richard and say, Richard, how can you write such a book? He said, oh, look, I put a question mark against this sentence. It's only a question whether we are talking about the end of lawyers. But then Stephen Mason writing about partnership, the grand illusion. Great Laura Empson writing partnership, will they survive? A less gilded future in The Economist, avoiding extinction, the lawyer bubble, growth is dead, the death of big law. It is, if you read that, you think this market is going to die. We may not have a nose, we are still making money, but this market is going to die if you read just the titles of these books. Now, how are things if you talk to law firm leaders or market observers? And it seems to be quite similar. You have David Morley, Allen & Overy, reinvent or disappear. You have quotes from The Magic Circle will disappear within a decade. Now, many people would say the Magic Circle, I'm not part of it, so I don't care. But still, this Magic Circle obviously will disappear. One of the top 50 UK will sell itself for cash or do an IPO. A handful of high-profile failures dominated by highly leveraged firms. Tom Wood Barclays. Now, Tom Wood of Barclays is not just Tom Wood. Barclays is the bank who finances most of the UK law firms. So he seems to know something which we don't know. He knows something about the finance of UK law firms, and he feels fit to give that prediction. There is only one optimistic quote. Maybe it's no coincidence that this is coming from Germany. Mr. Loges, managing partner of Gleis Lutz, just said, I don't think the market will look spectacularly different, but that is in stark contrast of that what other market observers are saying. So it seems to be a very difficult situation. But paper doesn't blush. We academics like to write books with catchy titles in order to have many readers. Now, this is the result of a survey which was done by Bruce McEwen in 2013. It is not representative, but what he found out was that 42% of the lawyers who had been asked about the future of their law firm, 42% said, well, we will be able to fight back by honing our conventional model. 42%, less than 50%. A third said law firms will only be able to fight back by creating their own captive LPOs. Now, LPO is the abbreviation for legal process outsourcing. In our class, we talked about this today. 30% think we have to change. We have to change our offering. We have to change the way we are sourcing our services in order to be more competitive. And nearly 30% of people say law firms don't have any credible or effective defense in the long run. So is it really a question to say, is the market changing and do alternative service providers have the potential to disrupt the market? Or isn't that the answer, that this is happening, but we haven't noticed it yet? Let's discuss that in our round table. If we look at the development of the global market, and if you look at the MLaw 100 figures, which were published on Monday, there are three major trends, which we from Bucerius have described in an article which was published in January. The rich lawyers, the rich group, the elite, the Wachtels, are getting even richer. And the large firms, the DLA Pipers of this world, Baker, McKenzie, Jones Day, are getting even bigger. But it's getting tough in the middle. The firms in the middle are still there. They are still very profitable, but they don't grow. They don't grow, and the question is, what is their strategic outlook for the coming years? Julia, I see you nodding. I'm looking forward to what you have to say to this development. But still, the good firms, the Wachtels of this world, and the large firms are still doing very strong. What is happening in the middle? Well, we always had bad times. Legal markets are cyclical as the economy is. So why bother? Why talk about this? Why read this book from Richard and from Laura and from Stephen? Things are not that bad, right? But let's just imagine what is happening and what the competitive threat for traditional law firms are. Let's remind us what Michael Porter said decades ago, and let's try to apply that to the legal industry. So we have the classic industry rivalry, which is still very strong. We have you young guys, you suppliers, you high potentials, and I can predict you will have interesting times and you will be sought after, maybe not in traditional law firms, but you will have a great future because the problems don't go away, but the way these problems are tackled and solved is changing. You have new substitutes, new entrants into the markets, non-lawyerish, non-lawyer, legal service provider, offering their services for a fraction of the price the traditional law firm is able to do. You have new law firm entrants, spin-offs, boutiques, category cracker, all sorts of things. And you have clients who, with their in-house departments, which are populated by ex-law firm lawyers, partners and associates, clients have understood how law firms make money, and they are in a far better position than they used to be to fight back and negotiate better fee arrangements with law firms. So there is no way for law firms to say that doesn't apply to us. It's a perverse view. And it's not good to say, I've always said so. There must be something in the middle where law firms start to act and rethink the way they are offering their legal services. Now, this is too much text on this slide, but if you think about the classical, the traditional business model of law firms, I'm not talking about the pyramid, but there are two major attributes of the business model of law firms. One is the information asymmetry between the lawyer and the client. The lawyer knows more than the client, and that's the reason for the client to go to the lawyer. That's the traditional view of why people go to experts. But this information asymmetry is shrinking. The more people from law firms go into in-house legal departments, this information asymmetry is going away. So what is the new value to add for law firms which they could offer to clients? The second thing is, one core attribute of legal services is what is described by Hayden Christensen as opacity, which is not a very kind description of what law firms do, but the way how they generate their services, how they source their services is rather opaque. And only if something is opaque, you are able to charge out rates which the client doesn't really understand but has to pay anyway. Now, the more people move from law firms in-house, the more this opacity goes away and people understand how law firms make money. And they challenge the traditional model of making money and selling services. They move away from the input model, law firms claiming about their high reputation and their brilliant lawyers and their many doctors and LLMs and so on. That's the input side of life. They look at the output. They ask whether that, what is coming from the law firm, is value add to their business. And that's a threat to the traditional firms who are still working with the input model. And that's good news for new firms who don't have this long-standing history, who don't have a legacy of a firm, but are able to solve problems. So for them, it's a totally new market, and for traditional law firms, it's getting slightly complicated. Now, where are we now? Are we still in the stage of denial? This is from Richard Susskind's book, Tomorrow's Lawyer, which is slightly more optimistic than The End of Lawyers, but it's still based on his finding of his book, The End of Lawyers. So are we in the stage of denial? Are we in the stage of saying, come on, let's wait for a couple of months and the good times will be back? Or are we in the stage of resourcing, so that really law firms have to start to think about their sourcing, whether they do everything by themselves or whether they start to cooperate with legal service providers, stop to regard them as competitors and start to regard them as an addition to your business? Or will we ever reach the stage of disruption? So the stage where we are all reigned by artificial intelligence, embedded legal systems, no more lawyers, because if you press the button, you get the right answer and you don't have to study law or go to a lawyer. Maybe this is something for the future. Richard always said, my predictions are right, but my timing is wrong. So that's the easiest way to give a prediction. If you are not sure about the timing, I can give the best predictions. We are certainly not in the stage of disruption, but we are in a stage between denial and resourcing. And before the traditional major law firms will be swept away and will be the Kodaks of tomorrow, I think it's high time for law firms to rethink their business model and their sourcing to achieve the most important goal, which is to survive in different and good times. And this is it. Thank you very much.